The piercing sound of sirens tore through the morning air as my own father flagged down military police. I am Eric, a naval officer in my early 40s, waiting to be publicly arrested. The atmosphere at the Fort Bragg main gate spiraled into absolute chaos when my dad actively directed the armed guards to detain me right in front of dozens of passing soldiers. My older brother stood nearby with his arms crossed, wearing a smug smile, while repeatedly shouting venomous insults to brand me as a pathetic thief who had betrayed his own flesh blood. Two military police officers approached me holding cold steel handcuffs prepared to lock my wrists tightly together. I maintained a state of absolute composure instead of panicking because I was quietly waiting for an explosive reversal that they could never have anticipated. Just as the metallic click of the restraints was about to echo through the crowd, three high-ranking SEAL commanders suddenly emerged with an overwhelming presence that immediately halted the military police in their tracks. "Arrest him because he is a thief, since the military needs to throw these family traitors into prison," my older brother screamed with a triumphant grin. Before we continue, I want to ask if you have ever been completely betrayed by the people who share your blood while they smiled at your downfall. What exactly led to this ruthless betrayal, or what were the 6 shocking words spoken by the SEAL commander that caused my entire family to instantly collapse in disgrace? Let us go back to the very beginning so you can thoroughly understand how this elaborate trap was set up from the start. 1 week before that fateful morning at the military gate, everything began to fall apart, starting with a single property authorization document. I had just returned to my private residence after completing a grueling, months-long classified naval deployment when I received an unexpectedly urgent summons. I walked into my childhood home expecting a relatively normal greeting, but was immediately ambushed by a highly stressful family intervention that my mother Margaret had deliberately orchestrated alongside Dad. They had preemptively gathered in the formal dining room with an atmosphere so thick with suffocating tension that it felt exactly like a predefined courtroom trial waiting for the accused defendant to arrive. They directed me to take a seat at the polished mahogany table before bluntly demanding that I must unconditionally sign away my entire trust fund inheritance over to Sean. It became immediately apparent that my brother had recklessly driven his once lucrative defense contracting company to the absolute brink of bankruptcy through severe financial mismanagement and excessive personal luxury spending. They expected a 42-year-old military officer to willingly forfeit his legally secured financial future simply to erase the massive corporate debts that Sean had accumulated over the past 3 years. Mom deliberately adopted a theatrical tone of immense sorrow, while passionately explaining that family members must always protect each other during difficult financial crises, regardless of the devastating personal cost involved. My uncle and the family lawyer Paul sat comfortably across the table while sliding a remarkably thick stack of binding legal documents directly toward my hands. Paul immediately launched into a highly calculated monologue filled with fabricated legal barriers and overly complex professional jargon designed to intentionally intimidate anyone residing outside the legal profession. He explicitly threatened to tie up my financial assets in prolonged court battles, while falsely claiming that the original trust stipulations legally required me to redistribute the wealth if the primary family business ever faced total insolvency. He looked at me with an incredibly condescending smirk, while repeatedly tapping his expensive gold pen against the contract signature line to physically pressure me into a hasty submission. I maintained my absolute composure while carefully pushing the fraudulent legal documents back across the smooth wooden surface without bothering to read past the first page. I firmly refused to sign that completely unreasonable contract because their blatant attempt at extortion was poorly disguised as a necessary familial sacrifice for the greater good. Dad instantly erupted into a furious tirade while violently slamming his heavy fist against the table to physically assert his patriarchal dominance over the entire room. His face turned a deep shade of crimson as he viciously insulted my entire military career by labeling me as nothing more than a useless administrative desk clerk who cowardly hides behind mountains of meaningless paperwork. He continued his aggressive verbal assault by loudly declaring that I had never contributed anything of real, tangible value to the family legacy while Sean was supposedly building a massive corporate empire. Sean sat completely silent next to Paul while maintaining a deeply arrogant posture, because he fully expected our parents to successfully bully me into permanently surrendering my hard-earned financial independence. Mom continuously wiped away fake tears while aggressively accusing me of being heartlessly selfish for stubbornly refusing to rescue my own brother from an entirely self-inflicted corporate disaster. They genuinely believed that my typical quiet demeanor during these hostile family gatherings was a clear sign of weakness that they could easily exploit to achieve their greedy financial objectives. I looked at the 4 people sitting in that dining room and finally recognized the absolute moral decay of those who supposedly shared my exact biological bloodline. Instead of engaging in a pointless shouting match to desperately defend my honorable naval service, I coldly stood up from the formal dining chair and meticulously adjusted my uniform jacket. I did not offer them any further emotional reactions or unnecessary explanations as I calmly walked out of that thoroughly toxic house without glancing back at their furious faces. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I clearly understood that their desperate financial situation would inevitably drive them to employ much more ruthless and destructive methods to illegally confiscate my money. That evening, the absolute silence inside my private apartment was completely shattered by a series of bright red warning lights flashing continuously across my secure military computer monitors. I quickly recognized that my highly classified personal naval identification code was being illegally cloned by an unauthorized external user who desperately wanted to bypass the formidable digital security perimeter. This unknown intruder was intentionally utilizing my command credentials to stealthily infiltrate the top-secret logistics data repository belonging exclusively to the United States Armed Forces. The remarkably sophisticated nature of this cyber breach clearly indicated a meticulously planned espionage operation, rather than a random hacking attempt by a typical amateur opportunist. Someone with incredibly intimate knowledge of my military career trajectory was actively manipulating the secure system to perfectly frame me for an incredibly serious federal crime involving classified national security documents. My best friend Timothy, an exceptional cybersecurity expert who frequently consulted for various government intelligence agencies, immediately established a heavily encrypted communication channel to securely assist me in tracing the hidden origin of this blatant digital attack. We seamlessly coordinated our technical efforts to isolate the corrupted data packets while meticulously avoiding any sudden network actions that might inadvertently alert the hostile intruder to our active defensive surveillance. Timothy rapidly deployed multiple tracking algorithms specifically designed to strip away the complex layers of false geographic locations that the hacker was utilizing to mask their true physical whereabouts across the global network. The intense glow of the computer screens illuminated his deep concentration as he worked frantically to uncover the digital fingerprints left behind by the careless perpetrator who foolishly believed they were completely invisible to our countermeasures. Timothy locked down the secondary connection immediately because we are being actively infiltrated by an anonymous source. I warned aloud with a deep sense of urgent caution. I have successfully located the actual coordinates, and this specific IP address is originating directly from the corporate headquarters of Sean's company. Timothy replied with a highly tense voice. He had masterfully shattered the superficial layers of proxy servers designed to obscure the digital footprint of the malicious perpetrator hiding behind the computer screen. The undeniable technical evidence flawlessly pinpointed the exact unauthorized IP address routing straight through the highly protected internal network servers maintained exclusively by Sean's struggling defense contracting firm. The sheer audacity of using his own corporate infrastructure to launch a federal cybercrime against a naval flag officer demonstrated a terrifying level of desperate arrogance that I had never anticipated. We sat in absolute horror as the decrypting software finally revealed the truly catastrophic scale of the ongoing digital heist occurring right before our watchful eyes on the main display. Sean was not merely siphoning away my accumulated hazard pay stipends to artificially inflate his failing corporate bank accounts for his immediate short-term survival. He was actually executing a deliberate mass download of highly restricted military engineering blueprints featuring advanced weaponry designs that would easily fetch an astronomical fortune on the international black market if they fell into the wrong foreign hands. My own flesh and blood was willingly committing an egregious act of high treason to blindly sustain his luxurious lifestyle, while simultaneously preparing the perfect digital trail to guarantee my eventual federal tribunal and permanent public disgrace. The horrifying realization that my family would gladly sacrifice my freedom for their financial gain replaced any remaining familial affection with a profound sense of cold determination. In order to guarantee Timothy's absolute legal protection from any potential federal complicity charges during a future government investigation, I strictly ordered him to completely sever his connection and withdraw entirely from the compromised network architecture. Once I was working completely alone inside the darkened room, I personally engineered a series of highly sophisticated digital traps deliberately designed to silently monitor and meticulously archive every single illicit transaction without triggering any security alarms. I intentionally allowed the unauthorized downloads to continue flowing effortlessly toward Sean's corporate servers so that the undeniable forensic evidence would naturally accumulate into an inescapable mountain of concrete criminal documentation. My quiet patience during that intensely stressful night was not a passive surrender to their wicked scheme, but rather a calculated strategic maneuver to build an indestructible legal case against my traitorous brother, which would withstand any future scrutiny. The following morning, I forcefully pushed open the heavy solid oak door and walked directly into the expansive executive corporate office belonging to Sean, without bothering to wait for any prior administrative announcement from his startled receptionist. I marched straight toward the center of the room and violently threw a highly detailed printed statement containing the heavily encrypted IP transaction anomalies directly onto the polished surface of his ridiculously expensive mahogany desk. I sternly demanded that he immediately provide a comprehensive and entirely logical explanation regarding the completely unauthorized cyber infiltration, specifically targeting the highly classified military logistics network. Sean simply offered a deeply arrogant smirk while casually leaning back in his luxurious leather executive chair to brazenly admit a tiny fraction of the horrifying truth without showing a single ounce of genuine remorse. He appeared remarkably confident that the extensive political and legal connections possessed by Paul would easily be powerful enough to completely erase all digital footprints while effectively suffocating any formal accusations I might ever dare to submit. Do you honestly think you can use your internal corporate network to secretly siphon money and steal highly classified national documents without leaving a single undeniable trace behind Sean? I growled with a deeply threatening undertone echoing through the silent room. Paul suddenly strolled out from an adjacent private meeting room while displaying an incredibly condescending expression that perfectly matched the sickening arrogance constantly radiating from his nephew. He casually tossed a thick manila folder directly onto the wooden desk, while aggressively revealing his meticulously crafted master plan to formally submit a severe psychological instability complaint directly to my commanding officers stationed at the military base. This blatant attempt at character assassination was designed specifically to permanently ruin my pristine service record while simultaneously discrediting any valid financial fraud claims I might bring against their failing enterprise. If you do not obediently sign those property transfer papers right now, this incredibly detailed psychological complaint form will permanently sit on your commander's desk by this very afternoon. Paul coldly threatened with absolute unyielding malice. The already volatile situation escalated even further when Mom unexpectedly stepped inside the executive office while immediately launching into a highly theatrical performance of a deeply heartbroken parent desperately seeking immediate familial peace. She began weeping dramatically while shamelessly begging me to voluntarily accept a completely fabricated portion of the criminal blame just to protect our fragile public reputation and miraculously salvage the rapidly failing professional future belonging to my older brother. Her incredibly manipulative performance truly demonstrated that she valued the artificial perception of an immaculate family legacy far more than the actual freedom and honorable military career of her own youngest son. She continuously pleaded with me to swallow my pride and sacrifice my entire life simply to ensure that Sean would not face the devastating legal consequences of his own catastrophic financial failures. I stared at the three people standing in that lavish room while finally accepting the incredibly painful reality that their profound moral corruption had mutated into an incurable disease completely devoid of any basic human decency. Instead of arguing pointlessly with their delusional demands or desperately trying to prove my absolute innocence to entirely deaf ears, I discreetly reached deep inside my uniform pocket to silently activate a highly advanced micro-audio recording device. The remarkably sophisticated technology flawlessly captured every single spoken syllable of their ruthless blackmail attempts alongside their undeniable criminal complicity to serve as absolute ironclad evidence during the impending federal tribunal. I simply turned around and exited the corporate building with a perfectly calm demeanor, because I knew with absolute certainty that their arrogant confidence was about to be utterly destroyed by the undeniable truth. 2 days later, the sheer recklessness of those desperately cornered individuals officially crossed the invisible boundary from a mundane family extortion attempt into severe federal criminality. The highly sensitive intrusion detection sensors integrated directly into my personal vehicle parked securely within the restricted officer zone at Fort Bragg suddenly triggered a continuous flashing red alarm across my mobile device. I immediately accessed the heavily encrypted dashboard camera, broadcasting a pristine live feed directly to my secure military phone to visually investigate the unexpected physical disturbance occurring in broad daylight. The pristine high-definition recording perfectly captured Sean stealthily approaching my black sedan while confidently utilizing the unauthorized spare key that Mom had secretly provided him without my knowledge or consent. He moved with an incredibly practiced efficiency that clearly demonstrated this malicious sabotage had been meticulously rehearsed multiple times before he ever stepped foot onto the highly monitored military installation. He swiftly popped open the heavy metallic trunk before reaching deep inside his tailored suit jacket to extract a small digital storage drive containing completely fabricated national security intelligence. Sean ruthlessly shoved the fake classified USB alongside several thick folders marked with glaring red restricted stamps deep beneath the heavy tactical gear stuffed inside my standard-issue military duffel bag. His deliberate actions were expressly designed to manufacture an absolutely flawless counterfeit crime scene that would guarantee my immediate dishonorable discharge alongside several decades locked inside a federal penitentiary. Rather than foolishly sprinting across the sprawling asphalt parking lot to physically confront his treacherous behavior in public, I simply watched the entire treacherous performance unfold perfectly through the digital lens. Instead of allowing raw emotional outrage to dictate my response, I calmly contacted the Internal Military Investigative Division to declare the entire vehicle an untouchable federal crime scene, pending an immediate forensic evaluation. My absolute priority was strictly ensuring that every single contaminated fingerprint left behind by my deceitful older brother remained perfectly preserved on those incredibly dangerous classified materials for the upcoming tribunal. I explicitly instructed the base security personnel to establish an invisible perimeter around the compromised sedan so that Sean would falsely believe his devious entrapment had remained completely undetected by military authorities. Several hours after he successfully planted the damning evidence, Sean deliberately called my encrypted personal number to maliciously taunt my supposed ignorance regarding his flawlessly executed sabotage operation. He desperately wanted to revel in his temporary victory by dropping incredibly toxic hints about an impending surprise inspection descending from the upper echelons of naval command to completely destroy my life. It genuinely seems like the Internal Security Inspection Department is taking a very special interest in your personal vehicle today. Little brother. Sean's voice echoed with overwhelming arrogance through the mobile phone speaker. You are currently playing an incredibly dangerous game right now, Sean, because fabricating a false federal crime scene will only make your impending prison sentence significantly heavier. I calmly replied, with chilling certainty. He simply laughed out loud at my ominous warning because his inflated ego completely blinded him to the massive surveillance web that had already recorded his every single treacherous movement. He genuinely believed that his wealthy corporate connections could easily bribe the military police into ignoring any logical discrepancies found within the miraculously discovered counterfeit intelligence documents. My total lack of frantic panic during that highly disturbing telephone conversation completely confused him, since he fully expected me to desperately beg for a peaceful family resolution to save my prestigious naval career. He hung up the phone feeling completely victorious while remaining blissfully unaware that the tightening, invisible noose of federal justice was already wrapping firmly around his own neck. 3 days later, the entire federal audit network had silently locked onto its designated targets, while the incredibly arrogant prey remained completely unaware of their impending doom. I received a highly classified intelligence briefing directly from the Central Investigative Command Center, confirming that the massive flow of illicit corporate funds belonging to Sean was finally halted. The incredibly complex web of dirty money fueling his failing defense contracting business had been completely frozen under the direct approval of my top-level naval authorization code. Every single compromised bank account and offshore financial asset associated with his fraudulent enterprise was securely locked down by government auditors who meticulously traced the stolen military capital. Sean was effectively stripped of his entire financial empire without receiving a single warning notification from his corrupt banking associates, who were now frantically cooperating with federal authorities. The incredibly tense atmosphere escalated significantly when Dad unexpectedly tracked me down to the restricted parking lot located right outside the designated military officer housing complex. He approached my position with an unprecedented level of aggressive hostility while continuously shouting vile curses regarding my supposed lack of family loyalty and completely uncooperative attitude. He loudly condemned my deeply apparent cold-bloodedness toward my own flesh and blood, while completely ignoring the incredibly treasonous crimes that his oldest son had maliciously committed against the nation. his face contorted with overwhelming rage as he aggressively pointed his trembling finger directly at my chest to emphasize his intense disappointment in the youngest child he fundamentally despised. He genuinely believed that his relentless verbal intimidation tactics would somehow force me to surrender my military career to miraculously save the sinking corporate ship commanded by his favorite son. He arrogantly declared with absolute certainty that he had personally provided a highly confidential tip to the military police regarding the supposedly suspicious anomalies hidden inside my personal vehicle. He explicitly boasted about deliberately weaponizing the military justice system to forcibly throw his stubbornly disobedient son into a federal prison cell by tomorrow morning. I personally reported the highly suspicious irregularities located inside your vehicle to the military police, so tomorrow you will permanently lose absolutely everything for the unforgivable crime of high treason. Dad roared angrily with overwhelming malice. You should carefully remember those exact words you just spoke, because when the military police finally open that trunk, the person wearing the handcuffs will certainly not be me, I replied coldly with absolute unwavering certainty. He scoffed loudly at my calm response, while proudly detailing his perfectly orchestrated master plan to officially coordinate the upcoming vehicle inspection at the main security gate during the morning shift change. I simply stood completely still, like an unmoving stone statue, without bothering to emotionally refute his incredibly absurd accusations or defend my heavily tarnished personal honor. I just stared intensely at his furious expression with the incredibly cold and steely gaze typically reserved for a hopelessly compromised chess piece that is about to be permanently removed from the strategic board. He completely mistook my calculating silence for genuine paralyzing fear because his overwhelming arrogance prevented him from realizing that he was blindly walking into an inescapable trap of his own making. The sheer magnitude of his paternal betrayal solidified my absolute resolve to completely dismantle their criminal syndicate without showing a single ounce of unwarranted mercy or familial hesitation. While he gleefully turned his back and walked away feeling incredibly triumphant about his impending victory, a completely different legal execution was silently taking place within the federal justice system. The permanent revocation of the professional legal license belonging to Paul was officially approved by the Department of Justice and formally registered across the highly secure federal security network. The incredibly corrupt lawyer was permanently stripped of his ability to practice law primarily due to his undeniable involvement in massive financial fraud and his blatant obstruction of federal justice. Their meticulously constructed house of cards was collapsing simultaneously on multiple fronts, while they foolishly celebrated a fictional victory that would ultimately lead them directly toward a devastating prison sentence. I calmly walked back toward my secure military residence, knowing with absolute certainty that tomorrow morning would bring the ultimate conclusion to this incredibly toxic family nightmare. Exactly at 8 in the morning on Monday, the incredibly brazen theatrical performance orchestrated by my deeply corrupted family officially reached its dramatic conclusion near the main security checkpoint of Fort Bragg. The chaotic atmosphere seamlessly reconnected with the incredibly tense confrontation that was previously unfolding during the early morning hours. A highly cautious military police officer was actively cornering me against a massive concrete barrier while aggressively demanding my absolute physical compliance. The overwhelming sense of triumphant glee radiating from Dad and Mom was completely undeniable as they eagerly watched my supposedly imminent public downfall. Sean stood proudly beside his parents, while continuously flashing a remarkably arrogant smile that perfectly matched the incredibly malicious intentions festering inside his treacherous heart. Paul stood incredibly tall amidst the gathering crowd of highly confused military personnel while continuously shouting a constant stream of completely fabricated legal terminology. The incredibly cunning lawyer was desperately attempting to permanently shut down any potential external intervention from the surrounding soldiers who were closely monitoring the bizarre civilian outburst. He loudly quoted various imaginary military regulations to forcefully guarantee that my only remaining avenue of professional escape was permanently locked away behind solid steel bars. The corrupt attorney was fully relying on his incredibly intimidating verbal delivery to successfully coerce the base guards into executing an incredibly unlawful detainment without conducting any proper preliminary investigations. Mom was actively participating in the cruel spectacle by deliberately wiping away completely fake tears to falsely convince the armed sentries that her youngest child was a highly dangerous criminal mastermind. He possesses absolutely no legal immunity whatsoever, so you must handcuff this treasonous traitor immediately before he successfully escapes military justice. Paul aggressively barked his strict commands toward the visibly hesitant military police officer, right at the exact agonizing moment when the heavy metallic restraints were preparing to snap aggressively around my wrists. An incredibly massive black armored utility vehicle belonging exclusively to the elite SEAL forces violently interrupted the escalating confrontation. The heavily reinforced transport aggressively screeched to a sudden halt directly across the main traffic lanes, while successfully throwing the entire military security protocol into absolute logistical disarray. The incredibly sudden arrival of the heavily armed Special Operations Team completely paralyzed the surrounding civilian traffic, while simultaneously forcing the aggressive military police officer to quickly lower his silver metallic restraints. Captain Miller stepped out from the heavy vehicle door while projecting an aura of overwhelming absolute authority that immediately commanded the silent respect of every single uniformed soldier standing nearby. He marched purposefully straight toward my physical position with a remarkably stern expression while completely ignoring the hysterical screams of my frantic family members who were desperately demanding my immediate incarceration. He looked at the incredibly arrogant civilians with a deeply profound expression of absolute disgust before stopping precisely 3 feet away from my motionless body. "Admiral, the perimeter is now secured, and the federal arrest warrants targeting these treasonous citizens have been fully authorized," Captain Miller announced with a remarkably booming voice that echoed powerfully across the silent security checkpoint. He simultaneously executed a perfectly crisp military salute that definitively confirmed my heavily guarded high-ranking naval status to the completely shocked civilian spectators. That single astonishing gesture, combined with the incredibly powerful verbal confirmation, delivered an absolutely devastating psychological blow that completely shattered their deeply flawed illusion of total civilian superiority. The wildly triumphant smile currently plastered across the face of Sean vanished instantly into thin air as a profound wave of horrifying realization violently crashed into his fragile ego. Dad physically lost all strength inside his trembling legs and completely collapsed onto the hard asphalt surface in absolute pure terror as the monumental severity of his catastrophic mistake finally became undeniable. The deafening silence that abruptly fell over the military checkpoint firmly signaled the absolute permanent destruction of their incredibly foolish criminal syndicate. The harsh midday sunlight could not dispel the freezing coldness radiating from the terrified eyes of those who suddenly realized they had permanently lost absolutely everything. The military police immediately redirected their physical actions to completely release my wrists before forcefully twisting the struggling arms of Sean securely behind his back. The base guards physically restrained the screaming older brother with heavy metallic cuffs, while Paul was unceremoniously stripped of his professional credentials and forcefully escorted away right at the busy crime scene. Mom and Dad collapsed completely onto the scorching black asphalt, weeping pitifully as they desperately crawled forward to beg for unwarranted familial mercy. They shamelessly pleaded for me to abuse my supreme naval authority, to unlawfully intervene with federal law enforcement, to miraculously conceal the incredibly heinous crimes committed by their favorite child. In order to permanently destroy their manipulative delusions, I coldly retrieved the hidden audio device to publicly play the incredibly damning recording that explicitly detailed their ruthless familial complicity. The undeniable digital evidence echoed loudly across the silent military checkpoint as I formally declared the absolute severance of all biological ties, while firmly emphasizing that they would never receive forgiveness. I decisively turned my back without displaying any lingering emotional hesitation to confidently stride toward a massive military helicopter that was loudly roaring nearby on the secure landing pad. I departed the chaotic military installation while completely abandoning those greedy individuals to face their impending federal prison sentences alongside deeply humiliating financial bankruptcy entirely alone. This deeply dramatic story proves the brutal truth that sharing a biological bloodline certainly does not guarantee genuine personal loyalty during times of severe crisis. When overwhelming financial greed completely blinds their moral judgment, close relatives can easily transform into the most ruthless backstabbers imaginable. Maintaining a calm silence in the face of profound injustice is never a sign of pathetic weakness, but rather a golden opportunity to meticulously gather indestructible, ironclad evidence. True justice never needs to scream hysterically to prove its absolute validity, because it is perfectly authenticated by detailed legal documents and raw financial numbers that absolutely cannot lie. Sometimes the bravest possible action you can take to protect your own core values and internal peace is to strongly sever all connections with a fundamentally rotten family. Thank you so much for dedicating your valuable time to listen to the entire dramatic progression of this incredibly intense story until the very final minutes. If you unfortunately found yourself ruthlessly framed by your own parents or brother to serve as a convenient legal scapegoat, would you ultimately choose to forgive them or deliver an appropriate punishment? Please share your honest thoughts and unique perspectives in the comments section below so we can know.